Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. Cleopatra, the queen who challenged the conventions by marrying her brother, an act of love, politics, or a dark conspiracy to maintain power. Discover the secret behind this union and the truth about his reign. Subscribe and activate the bell so as not to miss anything. Think about Cleopatra. What comes to mind? Probably glamorous images, a seductive and powerful queen. But what is behind that image built over the centuries? The reality of Cleopatra's seven Philopathor is much more complex, wrapped in mystery and surrounded by legends that have obscured their true story. His life, his reign and death are still fascination and debate among historians. Many remember her for their relationship with Julio Caesar and Marco Antonio, two key figures in the history of Rome. But its history begins much earlier, in the heart of an Egypt in decay, a kingdom that struggled to maintain its independence against the growing power of Rome. Cleopatra was the last pharaoh of a dynasty that went back to the time of Alexander the Great. His reign was marked by political intrigue, strategic alliances, and wars. He had to navigate a complex world, full of betrayals and conspiracies, where survival depended on his cunning and his ability to manipulate those who surrounded it. But, to what extent do we know the true Cleopatra? What secrets keep its history? The reality is that Cleopatra ruled in an already weakened Egypt, a kingdom in the shadow of his glorious past. Think of the empire that once was, a giant who dominated the Mediterranean, and then imagines his gradual decline, victim of internal struggles and the pressure of Rome. The power of the pharaohs, once absolute, faded, replaced by palatial intrigues and a growing dependence on Roman power. The accumulated riches for centuries began to scarce. The royal treasure, which once dazzled the world, was gradually emptied, spent on useless wars, excessive luxuries and bribes to powerful Roman generals. The economy, once buoyant thanks to trade and agriculture, crumbled, leaving behind an increasingly impoverished and unhappy population. The army, once a formidable force, had weakened considerably. The discipline had relaxed, morality was by the soils, and corruption had infiltrated its ranks. The soldiers, poorly paid and demoralized, were easy prey to the intrigues and ambitions of the ambitious generals, who saw in Rome an opportunity to ascend. The administration of the kingdom had become inefficient and corrupt. Royal officials, more concerned about their own interests than for the welfare of the people, were enriched at the expense of the public treasure. Justice was selective. The law was applied arbitrarily, and confidence in the government had completely disappeared. In this context of decay, Cleopatra had to fight not only for his own survival, but also for that of his kingdom. But how did this dynasty govern Egypt? It all started with Alexander the Great. Do you remember? His fulminating conquest of the Persian Empire left a void of power, and after his death, his generals faced each other in a fierce struggle for the control of their vast territories. One of those generals, Ptolemy Isoter, won with Egypt, a prize coveted for its wealth and strategic value. Ptolemy, cunning and ambitious, founded the Ptolemaic dynasty, establishing its capital in Alexandria, a culture and learning center that flourished for centuries. Imagine a city full of libraries, museums, and an imposing lighthouse, attracting scholars and artists from all over the known world. His reign marked the beginning of a new era in Egypt, although very different from that of the pharaohs. His government was not exempt from conflicts, of course. Internal struggles for power, palatial intrigues, and rebellions were constant. But Ptolemy and his successors knew how to maintain control over Egypt, mixing the pharaonic tradition with Greek culture, creating a fascinating and complex Hellenistic culture. That mixture of cultures would be the one that would define the following centuries. After Alejandro's death, Egypt was in the hands of one of his generals. Ptolemy, an ambitious and cunning man, who quickly consolidated his power. It was not an easy task. He had to face other generals who also longed for control of the rich Egyptian lands. But Ptolemy, with his loyal army and his political ability, managed to impose himself. Imagine it: palatial intrigues, strategic alliances, the struggle for power in a context of instability after the death of a great conqueror. Prosody / speak. Speak. Prosody rate equals 90%. He founded the Ptolemaic dynasty, a dynasty that would reign in Egypt for almost 3 centuries. Ptolemy not only worried about maintaining military control, but also focused on the administration of the country. He implemented reforms to stabilize the economy and ensure the loyalty of the Egyptian population, adapting to local customs and traditions, an intelligent strategy to build a durable and powerful kingdom. His government marked the beginning of a period of relative peace and prosperity in Egypt, after the chaos of the succession wars. Ptolemy I, known as Soter, which means Salvador, won this title thanks to its ability to stabilize the kingdom and lay the foundations for a prosperous future. It is important to remember that he was not only a conqueror, but also an administrator capable of building a lasting legacy. His ability to combine military force with a skilled policy made him a key figure in the history of Egypt. But Ptolemy not only consolidated his power, so did his dynasty. After his death, the succession became a game of power, a struggle for the throne that involved his children, grandchildren, and other relatives. Imagine tension, palatial intrigues, alliances, and betrayals. Each heir struggled to ensure their place, sometimes with methods, say, unconventional. Brothers fighting for the favor of the father, wives machinery to ensure the future of their children, and the Egyptian people witnessing the climb of tension. Power, corrupt, and in Ptolemaic Egypt, this was especially true. Succession was not a simple transfer of power, but a struggle for survival, a battle for the control of an empire. Strategic marriages, political murders, and forced exiles marked the path of succession. Each new king inherited not only a throne, but also a complex network of alliances and enmity. It was a dangerous game, where a bad play could mean the loss of everything. And in the midst of all this chaos, the figure of Cleopatra emerged years later, heiress of this legacy of power and conflict. Among the many sons and daughters of the Ptolemies, Cleopatra VII emerged as an exceptional figure. His rise to the throne was not easy. After the death of his father, Ptolemy XII, the power fell to his children, Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII, who, according to the custom, had to govern together as kings and brothers. But reality was much more complex. A struggle for power was about to begin. Ptolemy XIII, supported by powerful directors, tried to relegate Cleopatra to the background. You will see how Cleopatra's ambition and cunning shone strongly in the middle of the palatial intrigues. His beauty and intelligence were powerful weapons, but they were not enough to ensure their reign. He needed allies, and found them in the least expected places. The situation became unstable. The rivalry between brothers became an open war. Cleopatra, with its intelligence and determination, knew how to navigate the political complexities of the time with skilled diplomatic maneuvers and a bold plan. He managed to recover his position as the ruling queen of Egypt. His rise to the throne was a triumph against all probabilities, a demonstration of his will and cunning force. Imagine little Cleopatra, surrounded by luxury and servitude in the Alexandria palace. From an early age, he breathed an environment of power and intrigue, closely observing the complexities of Ptolemaic politics. His education was rigorous, learning to speak several languages, dominate the arts and diplomacy, preparing for a future that was already mastered. Ambitious. Despite its young age, Cleopatra demonstrated exceptional intelligence and an insatiable thirst for knowledge. She was interested in history, philosophy, and astronomy, disciplines that helped her understand the complexity of the world that surrounded her and forge her own vision of power. Cleopatra's ambition was not only a feature of his personality, but a need to survive in a world dominated by the Ptolemaic court. The game of power was ruthless, and she quickly learned to navigate between alliances, betrayals, and rivalries. His childhood molded her, prepared her for the battles that still awaited her. In Ptolemaic Egypt, marriage was not just a matter of love. It was a crucial political tool to ensure the power and stability of the kingdom. Marriage alliances between real families and ruling dynasties were vital. Think about it as a chess game, where each marriage was a strategic piece on the board. Cleopatra, from his childhood, was aware of this game, observing how the marriages of his relatives defined the map of power. Prosody, speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%. His own life was marked by these alliances. Marriage with a foreign king was a way to ensure peace and military support. Imagine the pressure that it represented for a young princess, aimed at a political destination long before a romantic. Diplomacy was intertwined with affection, creating a complex network of interests and loyalty. These unions were not always loving, they were often cold negotiations to consolidate power. Marriage with his brother, Ptolemy XIII, was a clear example of this political practice, an attempt to maintain the unity of the dynasty and avoid internal conflicts. But what did this mean to Cleopatra? Was it a queen or a piece in a much bigger game? Remember that in Ptolemaic Egypt, marriage was a political tool. For you, Cleopatra's marriage with his brother Ptolemy XIII was not a choice, but an obligation imposed by the complex rules of dynastic succession. Imagine the pressure, the weight of an entire kingdom on its young shoulders, the need to maintain stability and power against court intrigues. Think about the situation. Two brothers, forced to join in marriage to legitimize their joint reign, a union that, from the beginning, was marked by the imbalance of power. Ptolemy XIII, although younger, was the designated heir, and Cleopatra, despite his intelligence and ambition, was in a subordinate position. This marriage was not a fairy tale, it was a political alliance, an attempt to maintain internal peace and stability of the kingdom, a union that, inevitably, would be full of tensions, rivalries and struggles for power. Do you think Cleopatra accepted his destiny with resignation or planned from the beginning how to escape the claws of this forced union? But that marriage did not mean union. You already know that Ptolemy XIII, although younger, was the designated heir. His ambition was immense and saw Cleopatra, his sister and wife, as a threat to his power from the beginning. The rivalry between them was evident. It was a struggle for the control of the throne, a silent battle freed in the halls of the palace and in the royal courts. Cleopatra, intelligent and cunning, did not stop crossed. He knew that his position was fragile and that he had to gain the support of the noble and general. While Ptolemy XIII relied on his counselors, Cleopatra cultivated his own alliances, weaving in influences that threatened his brother's established power. The court was divided, becoming a battlefield of intrigues and conspiracies. The struggle for power was not limited to palatial intrigues. Both brothers competed for the control of the army and the resources of the kingdom. Each victory, each concession, was another step in its dangerous game of chess. You could imagine the weight of the crown on his shoulders, the constant pressure of maintaining power in an Egypt divided and constantly threat of instability. Thus began the civil war. Ptolemy XIII, supported by the army and powerful advisors, moved quickly to consolidate his power. You saw how Cleopatra, with less military support, was forced to flee from Alexandria. The fight for the control of Egypt became a brutal career against clock, a struggle for survival where each movement was crucial. Imagine chaos. Besieged cities, bell battles, the population trapped between two sides. Cleopatra, far from surrendering, began to gather his own strength, looking for allies and recruiting loyal soldiers to his cause. His intelligence and cunning would be his most powerful weapons in this ruthless war. The war was not only fought on the battlefield. Propaganda and political alliances played a fundamental role. Cleopatra, skilled strategist, knew how to take advantage of divisions within the Ptolemy side itself to weaken it. You will see how the struggle for power became a mortal chess game, where each piece had an incalculable value. The fate of Egypt hung from a thread. The civil war was not only a struggle for the crown, but for the very future of the country. You are witnessing a crucial era, where ambition, betrayal, and courage were intertwined in a complex network of intrigues and fighting. That Cleopatra's survival, and with her, the fate of Egypt, was at stake. Obviously, the situation was chaotic. You were seeing how Cleopatra, fleeing from Alexandria, desperately looked for allies, and there was Rome, a sleeping giant who already rubbed his hands in the face of the possibility of intervening in the rich and strategic Egypt. Pompeo, a defeated Roman general, arrived on the coast of Egypt looking for asylum, waiting for the support of Ptolemy XIII. But the ambition of the young pharaoh, advised by his advisors, led him to a fatal decision. He ordered the murder of Pompey. Prosody, speak. The prosody rate equals 90%. That action, a colossal calculation error, had immediate consequences. Julio Caesar, Pompey's rival in Rome, was not going to let this affront pass. Pompey's death was a declaration of war. Caesar, with his army, arrived in Egypt not as an ally of Ptolemy XIII, but as a conqueror. You saw how the balance of power was drastically inclined to Rome. Cleopatra, cunning and calculator, saw an opportunity at Caesar's arrival. Instead of facing Rome, he decided to use his ingenuity and beauty to obtain his support. His encounter with Caesar, a legendary story, marked a radical turn in the conflict. You were witnessing how Roman intervention not only altered the Egyptian civil war, but also sealed the fate of the ancient kingdom. And then he appeared, Julio Caesar. A name that resonated with power even in the dusty streets of Alexandria. You saw him arrive, not as a savior on a white horse, but as a political storm, with his army in tow and an excessive ambition that eclipsed the splendor of the same Nile. Cleopatra, cornered and desperate, saw in him his only hope, his last letter to recover his kingdom. His encounter was a game of power and seduction, a mortal dance between two bright minds. Caesar, accustomed to intrigue and conquest, was fascinated by Cleopatra's beauty and intelligence. She, in turn, knew how to play her cards with mastery, using her charm to convince the powerful Roman that her cause was fair. Caesar's support was not simply a sample of generosity. It was a strategic investment, a key piece in its complex political game. With the support of the Roman army, Cleopatra was able to return to Alexandria, not as a fugitive, but as a triumphant queen. Caesar not only returned his throne, but also made her ally, a fundamental piece in her strategy in the Mediterranean. His relationship was beyond politics, a mixture of love, convenience, and power, which would forever mark the history of Egypt and the Roman world. You were witnessing how a woman, with cunning and courage, made way among the shadows of power. So there he was, in the middle of the chaos of Alexandria, and you, Cleopatra, saw it, not as a brutal conqueror, but as a powerful, charismatic man, with an intelligence that shone in his eyes. Maybe it was his aura of power, perhaps his penetrating gaze, which attracted you. But the truth is that the alliance with Caesar was not just a matter of physical attraction. It was a brilliant strategy to ensure the future of Egypt. The ancient Ptolemaic kingdom staggered, threatened by the ambitions of Rome. You, Cleopatra, understood that you needed a powerful ally, and Caesar was the indicated man. A strategic alliance with the powerful Roman general offered you protection, resources, and the possibility of consolidating your reign, relegating your brother to the background. The romance that arose between them was undoubtedly a fundamental component of this alliance. But it was not any romance. It was a calculated union, a strategy to ensure the power and stability of Egypt. Cleopatra's charm captivated Caesar, but political ambition was the cement that united these two different leaders. And then Caesarion arrived, a child who would change the course of the story. His birth was an explosive event, a symbol of power and a clear declaration of intentions of Cleopatra. I imagine that for you, seeing it for the first time was a mixture of unconditional love and deep anxiety. He was the son of Caesar, a legitimate heir of the Roman Empire, and his arrival in the world meant a new era for Egypt, an era full of possibilities, but also of imminent dangers. But Caesarion was not just an heir, it was a key piece in the political game of Rome and Egypt. Its existence challenged the established order, raising a threat to the Roman senators who saw in it a possible rival to power. For you, Cleopatra, his survival was crucial, a guarantee for the future of Egypt and a way of maintaining your influence on the Mediterranean. You had to protect it at all costs. Little Caesarion became the center of a complex network of intrigues and alliances. Its very existence was a provocation, a statement of power and a symbol of the relationship between Cleopatra and Caesar. For you, he represented the hope of a better future, a future where Egypt could maintain its independence and prosperity. But that hope was constantly threatened by the shadows of Roman politics. But the joy for Caesarion vanished with the news that came to Alexandria as a blow of puñal. Julio Caesar had died, killed in the Roman Senate. Do you imagine the impact on Cleopatra? His lover, his protector, the man who had given him a child and a place in the heart of the empire, murdered. His ambitious plan to ensure his dynasty and his son's inheritance staggered. /prosody/speak. Speak. A prosody rate equals 90%. Suddenly, Cleopatra was vulnerable. Without Caesar's support, his position in Egypt weakened. The enemies who previously kept at bay thanks to the Roman influence now dared to raise their heads. Caesar's death meant the end of an era of stability and the beginning of a struggle for power in Rome, a struggle that would leave her out of play if she did not play her cards with intelligence. Caesar's murder not only represented a personal loss, but a master blow to his political strategy. His plan to ensure the future of Caesarion, to make him heir to the Roman Empire, vanished with the dictator's lifeless body. Now, he had to face a new reality, one where his son's survival and his own security were in serious danger. How could the treacherous waters of Roman politics navigate without the support of its powerful ally? Caesar's death left Cleopatra vulnerable. He needed a new protector, someone with sufficient power to defend her from the ambitions of her enemies in Rome. And that someone appeared in the form of Marco Antonio, a Roman general of great charisma and ambition, who was in Egypt after the murder of its leader. Antonio, fascinated by Cleopatra's beauty and intelligence, felt quickly attracted to her. Unlike many Romans, Antonio did not see in Cleopatra only a powerful queen, but an exceptional woman. A relationship began that would transcend the political, consolidating his power in the east and protecting Cleopatra and his son, Caesarion. This alliance provided Cleopatra with the stability that he needed so much. Antonio helped him maintain his kingdom, consolidate his power and protect his son, Caesarion, as a legitimate heir. But his relationship was not just a matter of political convenience. Among them emerged a passionate love, which would challenge Roman conventions and palatial intrigues. The arrival of Marco Antonio marked a new chapter in Cleopatra's life, a chapter full of passion, power, and also of danger. Their relationship would challenge the norms of Rome, and the consequences of this bold union would forever change the course of history. Thus Marco Antonio, a charismatic and powerful Roman general, appeared. His arrival in Alexandria was an earthquake. You know that Cleopatra, cunning and seductive, knew how to take advantage of the opportunity. He soon captivated him with his beauty, his intelligence and his enigmatic personality. The powerful Roman, accustomed to women's favors, was pledged by the Egyptian queen as she had never been before. His romance was an explosion of passion, a story full of luxuries and excesses. Cleopatra, accustomed to absolute power, found an equal man in Antonio, a man who understood and admired her. He, fascinated by his exoticism and power, gave himself completely to his love. The dazzling banquets, the extravagant parties, and the opulent gifts became the framework of their passionate relationship. Beyond physical desire, its connection transcended the purely carnal. There was an intellectual complicity, a mutual understanding that went beyond passion. They shared political strategies, dreams of greatness, and a common vision of the future. They supported each other, building a powerful alliance, both in the political and sentimental field. But his love, as intense as ardent, was destined to be a whirlwind of emotions, full of risks and challenges. The Roman, conservative and traditional society did not see with good eyes the relationship between the powerful general and the foreign queen. His romance, a symbol of power and passion, would become the trigger for a war that would change the course of history. He soon became pledged to his charm, and his power. 3 children were born from that union: Cleopatra Selene II, Alejandro Helios, and Ptolomeo Philadelpho. You imagine, right? The birth of these children was a first-order political event. They were potential heirs of an empire that extended from Egypt to the borders of the known world. His arrival in the world announced a new era, an era of shared power between Rome and Egypt. Cleopatra, always calculating, saw in her children the key to ensuring her legacy and the future of Egypt. The little ones, although born in luxury and opulence, were destined for an uncertain destination. The fate of his children was linked to the delicate balance of power between Rome and Egypt, a balance that could be broken at any time. You think, what future would these children hold? Alejandro Helios, whose name means soul, was appointed heir to the eastern territories of the empire. Cleopatra Selene II, which means Luna, would inherit Cyrene, and Ptolemy Philadelpho, in honor of the Ptolemaic tradition, was destined to maintain the real line of Egypt. But reality, as always, turned out to be much more complex than Cleopatra's plans could foresee. You will wonder, what happened to your ambitious plans for your children? /prosody /speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%, but happiness with Antonio faded quickly. Octavio, the heir of Julio Caesar, approached with his powerful fleet. Imagine tension, fear, uncertainty in the air. The Battle of Accio, in the year 31 BC, was coming, a confrontation that would decide the fate of Cleopatra and his empire. You know that the naval battle was brutal. The ships collided, the swords crossed, the sea was dyed red. The fleet of Cleopatra and Antonio, despite their greatness, was overcome by the strategy and number of Octavio's ships, an overwhelming defeat that marked the end of an empire. After the defeat, Antonio committed suicide, leaving Cleopatra alone before Octavio's implacable fury. Think of despair, in betrayal, in the imminent end of a golden era. The splendor of Egypt, his power, his magic, everything collapsed. The Battle of Accio not only meant the end of the Roman hegemony of Antonio and Cleopatra, but also the decline of a period of splendor and wealth in Egypt. It was the beginning of an empire, the end of a legendary reign, a tragic chapter in the story that marked the beginning of a new era. After the defeat in Accio, the situation became critical. You know that Cleopatra, to ensure his power and survival of his dynasty, had resorted to a marriage that would scandalize Rome. Join his brother Ptolemy 13. For many, this was an incestuous union and aberration. But in the complex Egyptian policy, real consanguinity had precedence and served to maintain the purity of the succession line. For Cleopatra, it was a survival strategy, a way to consolidate its power against external and internal threats. Remember that the rules of succession in Egypt were intricate. Brothers' marriage was not unusual among the pharaohs, a practice that, although disgusting for the Romans, looked like something normal to ensure the purity of real blood and divine lineage. For you, this union may seem terrible, an act of incest. However, it is essential to understand the cultural and political context of the time to understand Cleopatra's motivations. It was not an act of love passion, but a strategic political decision. This marriage, although ephemeral, had huge implications. The union with Ptolemy 13 reinforced its position as ruler of Egypt. Although this marriage did not last long, it was a tool to maintain control, a symbol of power and legitimacy at a time of great vulnerability. For Cleopatra, love was secondary. The survival of his kingdom was the main thing. The story would judge her for her actions, but her decisions were shaped by the extraordinary circumstances in which she lived. You know that endogamy, marriage between nearby relatives, was a common practice among the real families of ancient Egypt, including the Ptolemaic dynasty. It was believed that it maintained the purity of the real blood and ensured the continuity of the lineage, an idea that, from our current perspective, we know it was wrong. But at that time, it was a deeply rooted belief. For real families, marriage was not only a union of love, but a crucial political tool to maintain the power and stability of the kingdom. Marrying a close relative, often a brother or sister, guaranteed that the succession line remained inside the family and that it was not threatened by potential rivals. It was a survival strategy, although often with devastating genetic consequences. Think about it. Real blood was considered sacred, a divine gift that should be protected from any external pollution. Endogamy, although today we see it as something harmful, was seen as a way of preserving that divine purity and maintaining power within the royal family. This practice extended throughout several dynasties, partly explains the complex and often confusing network of family relationships that we find in the history of the Ptolemaios. But why this practice so peculiar? For Ptolemaic royalty, brothers' marriage was not simply a custom, but a crucial political tool. It was about preserving dynastic power and legitimacy. When marrying their brothers and sisters, the pharaohs claimed that the throne would remain inside the family, avoiding internal disputes and consolidating their lineage. Think about it. A marriage between brothers meant a concentration of unmatched power. There was no doubt about the succession, nor struggles for the control of the throne. The royal blood remained pure, or so they believed, ensuring the continuity of the dynastic line and avoiding the entry of possible rivals to power. It was a strategy to maintain absolute control. In addition to political stability, incestuous marriage also served to legitimize the reign. Marrying a close relative, especially with a brother or sister, reinforced the idea that Pharaoh was a direct descendant of the gods, a divine being with the innate right to the throne. This sacred connection was vital to maintain the authority and respect of the people. Prosody, speak. Speak, a prosody rate equals 90%. But Cleopatra was not only a powerful queen, she also cultivated a carefully elaborate image. Think of its portraits. It always appears with exceptional beauty, reflecting the sophistication and refinement of its It was surrounded by luxury, art, Greek and Egyptian culture, creating an atmosphere of greatness that raised it over mere royalty. Her mastery of several languages, including Greek and the Egyptian, made it an intellectually superior figure, a cultured queen that embodied the fusion of Greek and Egyptian cultures. This image of scholarship contrasted with the traditional image of royalty, projecting a modern and fascinating image. Cleopatra understood the power of the image. Not only was it presented as a powerful queen, but also as a seductive and enigmatic figure. Her beauty, her intelligence, and her domain of diplomacy made her an iconic figure, an image that transcended her time and has reached to this day. But how was life in Egypt during Cleopatra's reign? Imagine a complex, stratified society with a rich religious tradition that permeated every aspect of everyday life. The gods and goddesses, omnipresent in majestic temples and in domestic life, molded people's beliefs and practices. You could see priests making rituals, religious processions full of color, and the deep veneration for the Nile, source of life and fertility. Agriculture was the backbone of the economy. You could imagine peasants working the fertile lands of the Nile Valley, cultivating wheat, linen, and other essential crops. The trade flourished, connecting Egypt with other civilizations through maritime and land routes. Think of the exotic goods that arrived in Alexandria, the great cosmopolitan port, a melting pot of cultures and languages. The Egyptian society was organized in hierarchies, with the pharaoh at the top, followed by the nobility, the priests, the scribes, the artisans, and the peasants. Daily life depended largely on the social position, but all were connected by religious beliefs and shared cultural practices. You could even imagine a diligent scribe working in a papyrus, documenting the life of the court or the real decrees. Think of the omnipresence of the gods in the daily life of the Egyptians. It was not a separate religion from everyday life, but it was intrinsically intertwined with it. From Pharaoh, considered a living god, to the most humble peasant, all depended on the divine will for prosperity and good fortune. Each decision, each action, was carried out considering the favor of the gods. Cleopatra, like Pharaoh, had a crucial role in this relationship. She not only represented the gods on earth, but also her mediator, in charge of maintaining cosmic harmony and ensuring the fertility of the Nile, vital for the survival of the Egyptian people. The great temples, the complex rituals, and the lavish celebrations were key to maintaining this divine link. The Egyptian gods were not abstract entities, but beings with personalities, weaknesses, and strengths, like you and me. They were powerful, but also capricious, and their favor could change quickly. Therefore, worship were constant, a way to appease them and ensure their protection. Religion was a fundamental part of Egyptian identity, shaping its culture and beliefs. But what is Cleopatra today? Beyond the legends and films, his legacy lies in the immense fascination he awakens. His image, a mixture of power and mystery, endures over the centuries. You remember her as a powerful, cunning, and beautiful queen, capable of captivating the most powerful men in the world. That image, molded by history and fiction, is its most durable legacy. It is the echo of a golden age, an era that you can now glimpse through their stories. Its history, full of passionate political intrigues and romances, has inspired artists, writers, and filmmakers for centuries. Each new interpretation of his life adds one more layer to his legacy, perpetuating his figure over time. Think of the innumerable works of art, the historical novels, the epic films that have it as the protagonist. All of them somehow contribute to keep their memory alive. Cleopatra was not only a queen, but also a symbol of female power, resistance, and intrigue in a world dominated by men. His image, often idealized, has become a lasting cultural icon, a testimony of his charisma and his impact on history. You can reflect on the way in which its history continues to resonate in today's society, inspiring debates and new interpretations. Prosody, speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%. But how has Cleopatra been represented throughout history? You have seen innumerable images, from the Roman currencies that showed it with idealized features, to the Renaissance paintings that portrayed it as a fatal seductive. That image, that of a powerful and enigmatic queen, has been shaped and remodeled over the centuries, sometimes reflecting the ideas and prejudices of each era. Think of Shakespeare, for example. His work immortalized a passionate and cunning Cleopatra, although perhaps a bit away from historical reality. The cinema, meanwhile, has offered very different versions, from the sensual Cleopatra of Elizabeth Taylor to other interpretations closer to a complex political figure. Each representation has contributed to build the myth, but also to distort it. Art, from sculptures to painting, has explored different facets of its personality. Sometimes she has been shown as a goddess, sometimes as a vulnerable woman. But in all representations, the fascination for its enigmatic life underlies. What was Cleopatra like? The answer, perhaps, is in the complexity of these various images that history has read us. But who really was Cleopatra? The story, molded by the Roman victors, has often painted it as a cunning and dangerous seductive, a manipulative queen who used her beauty and charm to control the powerful men of Rome. This image, recorded in our collective memory, presents it as a villain, an ambitious and ruthless figure who sacrificed everything for power. However, there is also another version of the story. Some historians argue that Cleopatra was an intelligent and capable ruler who struggled to maintain the independence of Egypt against the growing Roman threat. His reign was a period of cultural and artistic splendor, despite political difficulties. Perhaps, Cleopatra's vision as a villain is simply a Roman narrative construction, a way to discredit a powerful queen who dared to challenge them. The truth, as is usually the case, is probably at some intermediate point. Cleopatra was a complex woman who acted within a particularly difficult historical context. His legacy is a reflection of the contradictions of his time, of the struggles for power and survival that it is you, as a spectator, to whom it corresponds to decide which image of Cleopatra is most convincing to you, based on the historical evidence available and on your own interpretation of the facts. But the image you have from Cleopatra, where does it really come from? Much of what we know or we believe is filtered through the lens of literature and cinema. Shakespeare, for example, immortalized her in her work, presenting her as a complex queen capable of love and betrayal, cunning and vulnerability. His representation, although dramatized, has deeply influenced the popular perception of the pharaoh. Since then, innumerable films have resumed the figure of Cleopatra, offering diverse and often contradictory versions. Some show it as an irresistible seductive, capable of manipulating the most powerful men in the world. Others, on the other hand, portray it as a victim of circumstances, a fighter woman trapped in a network of political intrigues. Each interpretation, naturally, reflects the time in which it was created. It is fascinating to see how the image of Cleopatra has evolved over time, adapting to the sensibilities and values of each era. These representations, although often distant from historical reality, speak to us more about the societies themselves that created them than about Cleopatra herself. They reflect on our own desires, fears, and fantasies, projecting in it our own ideas about power, love, and ambition. Shakespeare and other authors painted a seductive and cunning Cleopatra, capable of everything for power. But what really is in the history of your marriage to your brothers? The image of a queen who marries her brothers to maintain power is a very widespread myth, although reality is more complex. Actually, brothers' marriages were common in Ptolemaic royalty, a practice that sought to maintain the purity of the real blood and the unity of the kingdom. Cleopatra married Ptolemy XIII, his younger brother, according to the Ptolemaic tradition. It was a political union, more than a sample of romantic affection. Remember that the main objective was to ensure the political stability of the kingdom and maintain real lineage. It was not a matter of love, but of political survival for both. After the death of Ptolemy XIII, Cleopatra married his younger brother, Ptolemy XIV. Another political union, motivated by the need to maintain control and legitimacy of his reign. These dynastic marriages, although we seem strange today, were the norm in that historical context. They did not see them as something immoral, but as a crucial political strategy. Prosody, speak. Speak, a prosody rate equals 90%, therefore. The idea of an incestuous marriage based on love or desire is a modern interpretation that does not conform to the social and political norms of the time. Understanding the historical context is essential to avoid falling into the myths and prejudices that have distorted the image of Cleopatra over the centuries. His life was much more complex than they have told us. But what really happened? The truth is much more complex than a simple history of seduction. In Ptolemaic Egypt, the dynastic succession rules were flexible, say. Marriage alliances, even incestuous, looked as a way of maintaining power within the royal family and avoiding disputes on the throne. For you, this may sound scandalous, but it was a common practice at that time. Cleopatra was no exception. His marriages with his brothers, Ptolemy XIII and Ptolemy XIV, were not whims of an ambitious queen, but a political strategy to ensure his position and stability of the kingdom. Think of it as a way to ensure that the line of succession remained within the family, avoiding civil wars and the fragmentation of the empire. These unions, although considered incestuous by our modern standards, were seen as completely normal in the Egyptian culture of the time. Remember that ideas about family and marriage have evolved a lot throughout history. What today we consider morally unacceptable, in the past it could be a usual practice, even necessary for the maintenance of the social and political order. Think of the Egyptian customs of the time. For them, real marriage was not only a union between two people, but a sacred union vital for the stability of the kingdom and the continuity of the divine lineage of the pharaohs. The pharaoh was considered a god real, and his wife a divine consort, so his union was much more than a simple social contract. Marriages between brothers, although it seems strange to you, were not unusual in Egyptian royalty. It was believed that they maintained the purity of the real blood, and the direct connection with the gods. It was not seen as a taboo, but as a practice that guaranteed the power and stability of the pharaoh. Remember that religion played a crucial role in the life of the Egyptians. The pharaohs were considered intermediaries between the gods and the people, and their marriages were deeply linked to religious rituals and beliefs. The union between Cleopatra and his brother was, therefore, a matter of politics, religion, and dynastic survival. So, although from our current perspective it may seem scandalous, Cleopatra's marriage with his brother was deeply rooted in the social and religious beliefs and practices of Ptolemaic Egypt. It was a political strategy to ensure the stability of the kingdom and the continuity of its dynasty, not simply a personal whim. Imagine Cleopatra, a woman who sailed between two worlds. On the one hand, the pharaonic tradition, with its gods, rites, and the heavy burden of royalty; on the other, the Greek culture, with its philosophy, its art, and its political ambitions. She was the heiress of a long line of pharaohs, but also a woman educated in the Hellenistic culture, capable of speaking several languages and easily developing in the sophisticated court of Alexandria. That duality was reflected in its way of governing. He knew perfectly the Egyptian customs, respected them and used them in his favor, but at the same time, he introduced Greek elements in administration and public life. His image was molded according to the need, presenting himself as a powerful and divine pharaoh before his Egyptian subjects, and as a cultured and refined queen before foreign ambassadors and dignitaries. His ability to move ease in both worlds allowed him to forge strategic alliances, manipulate his enemies, and ensure his survival at a crucial moment for Egypt. Cleopatra was an exceptional political strategist, aware that his power depended on his ability to negotiate and adapt to the changing circumstances of the empire, an empire that staggered between tradition and modernity. Her domain of Greek and Egyptian, her knowledge of culture and politics, made her a unique and incomparable figure in history. Think about your legacy, right? Cleopatra was not just one more queen. His reign, although short, marked a turning point in history. His relationship with Julio Caesar, and then with Marco Antonio, changed the course of the Roman Empire, carrying the Egyptian influence to Rome and beyond. Imagine the impact of that union, the clash of cultures, the political strategies that were woven in that crucible. His romance with Caesar brought Egypt an era of prosperity and stability, but he also sowed the seeds of the future defeat by involving the country in the complexities of Roman politics. That connection, although full of passion and power, was a double-edged sword, don't you think? Prosody /speak. Speak, prosody rate equals 90%, and his relationship with Antonio. A love and war story. The alliance between Egypt and Rome, forged under its reign, modified the balance of power in the Mediterranean. His political decisions, their strategic alliances, had consequences that resonated for centuries. His image, his legend, became a symbol of power and seduction. But what is Cleopatra today? Beyond the films and books, his legacy lies in the fascination he awakens. You are here yourself, watching this video, interested in your life, in its mysteries, in its impact. That, in itself, is a testimony of its enduring influence. Its history, with its lights and its shadows, continues to resonate centuries later. The image of a powerful queen, wrapped in intrigue and romance, endures in the collective imaginary. His marriage to his brother, although scandalous for our modern standards, was a common practice in the Ptolemaic era. It was a political strategy to maintain power within the royal family. A decision that, although today we judge it with a different perspective, was an intrinsic part of his life and his reign, molding his destiny and the decisions he later made. Remember that Cleopatra was not just a historical figure. She was a woman who sailed the complexities of power, love, and politics in a turbulent era. Its history, with its controversies and its achievements, remains a topic of debate and fascination. His legacy is not limited to his reign, but to the way his life, so full of drama and mystery, continues to captivate our imagination. So, have you ever wondered if Cleopatra really married his brother? The answer, although it seems incredible, is in Ptolemaic Egypt. The unions between brothers were common to maintain power within the dynasty. It was a political practice, not a personal whim, and although it seems disgusting today, in its historical context it was a strategy to preserve the purity of the succession line. But what about the rumors of incest? Was it just a political strategy, or was there something else? The truth is that Cleopatra's private life is still a mystery. Historical sources are limited and often biased. We cannot know with certainty the level of affection or repulsion that he felt towards his brother's marriage. And the question of the legacy: how did this marriage affect your image and your reign? Undoubtedly, marriage alliances with his brothers allowed him to consolidate his power, although they also turned her into a controversial figure. Even in his time, his image over the centuries has oscillated between seduction and cruelty. In short, the mystery of Cleopatra persists. Although we know that he married his brothers, the true nature of these relationships remains wrapped in the fog of time. What is clear is that their marriage decisions were key to their survival and reign, although we are strange or even repulsive today. But how do we know all this? The history of Cleopatra is not based on simple legends, but on careful investigation of ancient sources. Imagine historians scrutinizing papyrus worn by time, deciphering hieroglyphs and analyzing Greek and Roman texts. These primary sources, written by contemporaries or people who lived relatively close to it, are the basis of our knowledge. Plutarch, for example, in their Parallel Lives, offers a fascinating vision, although sometimes biased, from Cleopatra. His descriptions, although dyed by the Roman perspective, give us an idea of his personality and his actions. Remember that he wrote from an external perspective to Ptolemaic power, which influences his story. In addition to Plutarch, other Roman authors, such as Appiano and Diodorus, contribute their own perspectives. His writings, although sometimes contradictory, help us build a more complete, although complex image of the Queen's life. It is important to consider the historical context and possible motivations of each author when interpreting their works. Therefore, the understanding of Cleopatra's life depends on a critical analysis of multiple sources. Comparing and contrasting the information to rebuild its history is not an easy task. But thanks to the work of historians and Egyptologists, we can approach the truth about this iconic figure. I hope you enjoyed the video. If you liked it, give like and subscribe for more fascinating stories. What do you think about Cleopatra's fate? Leave it in the comments. /prosody/speak